One minute he thought it was just steak. The next, Dwayne Johnson feared he'd eaten human flesh at one of Diddy's parties. In a revelation that left the courtroom stunned and the public reeling, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson took the stand today and dropped a bombshell. He claims he was tricked into eating what he was told was rare beef, only to later suspect it was something far more horrifying. This shocking allegation is just the latest in the spiraling trial of Sean "Diddy" Combs, who now faces mounting charges of human trafficking, coercion, and conspiracy. From celebrity guests to secret dining rituals, this story is unraveling fast, and what we've uncovered will shake Hollywood to its core. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. There are moments in courtroom history that burn themselves into the collective consciousness. A stunned hush that settles over a room full of strangers, gasps that escape before they can be stifled, and faces frozen in disbelief. What happened today inside the packed courtroom during Sean "Diddy" Combs' trial wasn't just a moment. It was a seismic rupture in celebrity culture, the entertainment industry, and perhaps even the way we define power itself. Because just 1 minute ago, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson took the stand and said something so shocking, so utterly incomprehensible, that the entire courtroom sat paralyzed. A-list attorneys dropped their pens. A camera operator in the media gallery lowered his lens, as if his hands had forgotten how to function. And Diddy, once a symbol of swagger, wealth, and untouchable celebrity, slumped back in his chair, as though the full weight of Johnson's words had physically crushed the air out of his lungs. What did Johnson say? "They told me it was rare beef. It wasn't." Those chilling, unscripted words are now rocketing across social media, headlines, and courtroom transcripts like wildfire. But they're only a sliver of the horrifying picture The Rock painted, a picture that included manipulated dinners, coercive rituals, and what he called power dining. Johnson testified, under oath, that he was tricked into eating human flesh at one of Diddy's elite Hollywood parties. And he wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. He was shaking. Dwayne Johnson, the muscle-bound icon of strength, visibly trembled as he spoke those words. This wasn't part of a role. This wasn't a scene from a film. This was real. As the trial of Sean "Diddy" Combs begins to unfold, each passing day feels less like a standard courtroom procedure and more like a peeling back of a grotesque, glitter-coated onion, layer after layer revealing something darker, more putrid than the last. Diddy stands accused of human trafficking by coercion, unlawful interstate transportation for illicit purposes, and participating in a racketeering conspiracy that prosecutors claim has spanned decades and implicates countless powerful names. But no one, absolutely no one, expected Dwayne Johnson to become a witness. And certainly not like this. The courtroom had already been brimming with energy from the moment the proceedings began earlier this week. A rotating cast of federal agents, former staff members, and tearful former associates had taken the stand to describe the intricate lattice of fear, secrecy, and manipulation that prosecutors argued defined Diddy's private empire. But today's witness list included a single name that had not been disclosed to the public in advance. Court security doubled. The media gallery was sealed off to all but credentialed national outlets. At 10:42 a.m., a murmur swept through the courtroom as a towering figure in a gray tailored suit walked through the double doors and sat down behind the witness stand. Dwayne Douglas Johnson. He didn't look like the action figure millions had come to adore on screen. He looked haunted, haggard. His jaw was tight. His movements, usually fluid and confident, were stiff, deliberate, restrained, as though he was afraid of unraveling. The prosecution wasted no time. They launched into a line of questioning that seemed benign at first: his professional relationship with Sean Combs, his occasional appearances at industry parties, and his connections with mutual acquaintances in music, fashion, and film. Johnson kept his answers short, polite, measured. Then the prosecutor paused, looked Johnson square in the eyes, and asked a simple question. "Mr. Johnson, can you tell the court what you remember about the dinner hosted by Mr. Combs at his Holmby Hills residence on the night of August 18, 2018? Johnson hesitated for several seconds. The room fell silent. Not courtroom silent. Death silent. Finally, he adjusted his seat, glanced at the judge, and began to speak. What followed was a nearly hour-long testimony that painted a deeply disturbing portrait of a night he said he'd tried to forget, a night that had resurfaced only recently following therapy and media reports about other victims. He described being invited to a private dining experience by Diddy, who'd insisted it was a gathering of greatness, a place where only the most transcendent minds and bodies could partake. Johnson, flattered and curious, agreed. He arrived at the mansion around 9 p.m. and was led through a winding hallway into what he called a curated room, dark velvet walls, dim candlelight, and an enormous oak table in the center. Around it sat faces he recognized: musicians, directors, fashion moguls. Each person was silent. A man with a silver tray entered the room, lifting a polished lid to reveal a rare, bleeding cut of meat. Johnson testified that he was told it was Wagyu beef imported from a private farm in Hokkaido. Diddy raised a glass and made a toast. "Tonight, we eat what makes us gods." The line had seemed absurd, even theatrical, at the time. Then Johnson paused. He clenched his fists. His voice wavered. He continued, "I took a bite. The texture, the taste, it was different. Not beef. I know what beef tastes like. This was something else." Gasps filled the room. He went on to describe how he politely excused himself after one bite, unsettled by the atmosphere. He never spoke about it again until now. A few months ago, following media revelations about Diddy's alleged silence room, blackmail archives, and manipulation tactics, Johnson began seeing a therapist. During one of the sessions, a phrase triggered a flood of memories. The therapist urged him to speak up. He reached out to federal investigators quietly. They added his statement to a sealed witness list, confirmed certain details with others present at the party, and ultimately subpoenaed Johnson to testify. Johnson ended his testimony with a chilling statement. "I've played heroes on screen, but I never felt more powerless than I did in that moment, sitting in that room. I believe I was tricked into participating in something monstrous. And I'm here today not just for me, but for the people who can't speak." The silence that followed was not just the quiet of a courtroom respecting the gravity of the moment. It was the collective inability to process what had just been heard. It was a society having to reckon with the fact that the power structures it celebrates, the parties, the palaces, the playlists, might be built on something sinister. Diddy's legal team sat stunned. No objections. No cross-examination. No follow-up. It was clear they had not anticipated this. Whether they had prepared or not, no rebuttal could immediately erase the damage of what had just been said. And so now, we find ourselves at the edge of a cultural precipice. What happens next in this trial is anyone's guess. But one thing is certain: Dwayne Johnson's testimony just turned what was already one of the most explosive celebrity trials in modern history into something else entirely. Something that implicates not just one man, but perhaps an entire hidden ecosystem of power, ritual, and fear operating behind the closed doors of Hollywood's elite. The question isn't just whether Diddy is guilty. The question is, what exactly have we been looking at all these years, and what have we been too afraid to see? Before Dwayne Johnson's testimony rocked the courtroom, before federal agents swarmed Diddy's estates, and long before the public could piece together the scale of what was happening, there were signs. Fleeting, often disregarded, occasionally dismissed as rumors, but always present. The roots of Sean Diddy Combs' downfall did not begin with an arrest, nor with a lawsuit. They began with silence, strategic, corrosive silence that insulated a man who wielded power like a weapon and controlled access to the glitzy upper crust of entertainment. In the beginning, Diddy was simply a success story. A New York native who went from intern to mogul, from street-level producer to corporate titan. He founded Bad Boy Records, helped shape the careers of Notorious B.I.G., Maze, and Faith Evans, and became a symbol of luxury and hustle. He turned his name into a brand, crossing into fashion with Sean John, vodka deals, reality television, and ultimately, kingmaker status in Hollywood. But behind that ascent, former insiders now say, was a carefully curated web of loyalty built on intimidation, manipulation, and sometimes, threats. The signs first began appearing in whispers among staff. Former assistants and bodyguards described a culture of fear that surrounded Diddy, where speaking out about his personal behavior could end your career. Private parties were heavily monitored. Non-disclosure agreements weren't just routine, they were aggressively enforced. Phones were confiscated. Cameras were disabled. People who violated the rules, according to at least 4 former employees, were met with legal threats or sudden professional blacklisting. One former driver who spoke anonymously to prosecutors described a recurring incident where young women, many of whom were aspiring singers or influencers, were shuttled to private residences in the Hollywood Hills and instructed not to speak unless spoken to. They were then subjected to multi-hour waits in what one former housekeeper called the Velvet Room, where drinks were served, phones were stored in biometric safes, and background music blared to obscure conversation. This room was later confirmed to be part of what prosecutors would dub the silence room, a place designed to erode individual boundaries while maintaining the appearance of luxury. Yet, the wider public remained in the dark. That's because for years, Diddy played the media perfectly. He was philanthropic, vocal about Black excellence, supportive of youth initiatives, and always seen mingling with the right crowd. And for anyone raising doubts, there was always plausible deniability. Rumors were chalked up to jealousy. Allegations were discredited as opportunism. Diddy wasn't just a man, he was a brand, protected by millions in PR muscle and decades of cultivated goodwill. But underneath it all, a quiet war was brewing. Cassie Ventura, Diddy's longtime girlfriend and former musical protege, was among the first to formally break ranks. In late 2023, she filed a civil lawsuit alleging years of psychological abuse, coercion, and physical violence. Her lawsuit included harrowing accounts of control, including forced isolation from family, invasive surveillance, and threats that ensured her silence. While her suit was settled almost immediately out of court, with terms undisclosed, it opened a floodgate. Cassie's decision to go public gave courage to others, and the veil that had long obscured Diddy's private world began to lift. Following the settlement, investigative journalists began receiving anonymous tips, emails, documents, even photos. One such document, later authenticated by federal investigators, included a blueprint for a compound known internally as the archive. This wasn't a digital archive. It was a physical location, a massive underground data center buried beneath one of Diddy's properties in Los Angeles. According to testimony from a former systems technician, this archive stored footage, audio recordings, and other forms of digital leverage, gathered over years, if not decades. Many of the recordings, prosecutors now claim, were used to blackmail high-profile guests who attended his secretive gatherings. The cache allegedly includes surveillance of celebrities, politicians, and foreign investors caught in compromising positions. The implication is chilling. Participation in Diddy's world wasn't just social, it was transactional and often weaponized. Those who entered did so at the risk of being trapped. Those who tried to leave faced veiled threats, financial consequences, and in some cases, orchestrated smear campaigns. The FBI's interest in Diddy had long been limited to financial discrepancies and occasional inquiries into violent incidents involving his entourage. But after Cassie's lawsuit and the subsequent flow of testimonies, the Bureau quietly launched a multi-agency investigation involving not just the FBI, but Homeland Security and the Department of Justice. The scope went beyond mere celebrity misconduct. It entered the realm of organized exploitation. Diddy was no longer just a defendant in the court of public opinion. He became the subject of one of the most expansive investigations into a private citizen not holding political office in recent history. The grand jury was convened in secret. Witnesses were quietly flown in from different states under protection. A former house manager from Miami gave key details about the logistics of travel, describing how young women were selected, flown across state lines, and subjected to evaluation sessions disguised as auditions. One woman, only identified in court documents as Witness 3, testified that she was given a new phone, clothing, and an NDA before being flown to a compound in Nevada where she was instructed to remain available for a weekend-long party involving powerful businessmen and celebrities. She was 19. Over time, a pattern emerged. One not dissimilar to other high-profile criminal networks that used glamour and opportunity as bait. The parties weren't just celebrations. They were recruiting grounds. Behind the music and flashing lights was an unspoken code. You were being watched, assessed, and categorized. Those deemed compliant were invited again. Those who resisted found themselves mysteriously uninvited, ghosted by agents, or blackballed entirely. Then came the financial irregularities. IRS officials discovered shell companies linked to Diddy's business empire that were funneling untraceable payments to consultants, many of whom were women listed under aliases. Property records uncovered high-value real estate purchases made in the names of offshore trusts, some of which were tied to known associates already under investigation for international trafficking. The final blow came in the form of an encrypted drive anonymously mailed to a DOJ office. Forensics experts spent weeks breaking into the device, but what they found inside shocked even seasoned investigators. Videos, contracts, emails, voice recordings, enough to confirm a sophisticated system of recruitment, entrapment, documentation, and coercion. Some files included timestamped footage of events described in sworn testimony. Others appeared to show familiar celebrities involved in what prosecutors called morally ambiguous at best and criminal at worst behavior. That drive became the cornerstone of the federal case. A sealed indictment followed. Diddy's homes in Los Angeles, Miami, and New York were raided simultaneously in coordinated pre-dawn operations. He was arrested on federal charges including sex trafficking by force and coercion, interstate transportation for unlawful purposes, conspiracy to violate the Mann Act, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. The shockwaves were immediate. Brands severed ties. Industry insiders began scrubbing old photos. But more significantly, the case began to unravel what experts now call the celebrity immunity complex, the idea that wealth, fame, and social capital can shield someone from scrutiny. Because for years, it had. But the silence was broken. The dam cracked. And now, in this courtroom, the flood has come. This is no longer about one man's fall from grace. It's about a system that enabled him, a network that protected him, and a cultural blind spot that allowed the illusion of power to mask the machinery of exploitation. The courthouse was already tense when the doors swung open on day 14 of the trial, but no one expected what would follow. It wasn't a federal prosecutor, a victim, or even a surprise expert witness. It was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson who emerged from the hallway and took the stand. The room went silent. This was not a planned media stunt. This was not tabloid rumor. This was a moment that broke the pattern of celebrity omerta, where power protects power. For once, someone at the pinnacle of Hollywood decided to break that mold. There had been whispers that Dwayne Johnson might be on a witness list. Journalists had debated his connection to Diddy for years, both as entertainment power players, both having circled similar social and business circles. They had appeared at the same elite fundraisers, posed together at exclusive parties, and shared overlapping investments in entertainment tech startups. But until that moment, no one could have predicted he would testify. When he raised his hand to be sworn in, the cameras captured a man unusually somber. There was no smile, no posturing. Johnson was visibly shaken. The judge gave him a moment to collect himself. What followed wasn't performance. It was confession. Under direct questioning, Johnson began with what seemed like a standard recounting of how he and Diddy had come to know each other. "We met at a studio launch in 2010, he said. Back then, the industry was different. There was a lot of crossover between music, film, and business. You couldn't say no to certain rooms if you wanted to keep your opportunities alive." He described being invited to a private event in Beverly Hills hosted by Diddy. At first, it appeared to be a gathering of top-tier celebrities and financiers, talk of venture capital, luxury partnerships, and upcoming film deals. But by midnight, the nature of the party began to shift. Johnson recalled that younger women were escorted into the compound. They looked uncomfortable. Some were very young. "I remember one said she'd come to pitch a music demo, but none of the people she was supposed to meet ever showed." The courtroom leaned forward as he went on. The tone of the event had changed into something more ritualistic, less social. He described a blackout hour, where lights were dimmed and music was cranked up. No phones were allowed, and guests were led into different wings of the mansion. Johnson testified that he left early, sensing something was wrong. "I made an excuse to go back to my car. I didn't stay the night. But I should have spoken up." Defense attorneys tried to paint the testimony as vague. They pointed out that Johnson hadn't witnessed a crime firsthand. But that wasn't the bombshell. The true revelation came when prosecutors revealed a set of emails, supplied voluntarily by Johnson's legal team. One email, dated August 2018, was from Diddy's assistant. It read, "Appreciate you not saying anything after last time. You're solid. He's got your back for the tequila deal." The implication was clear. Silence had been bought, rewarded, and normalized. In this instance, it was in exchange for investment opportunities. Johnson admitted as much. "I didn't take any direct money," he said, "but I accept." Then came the audio. Prosecutors played a recording, one they had obtained through the encrypted archive. In it, Johnson can be heard during a conversation with Diddy and another unidentified man. Johnson is heard saying, "I don't want to be around that scene anymore. It's getting too dark." Diddy's reply was chilling. "Ain't nobody ever gonna talk, man. I got everybody's secrets locked up. You included." The courtroom gasped. What Johnson had hinted at, the audio confirmed. There was a culture of silence, and it was enforced through a combination of loyalty, fear, and leverage. Johnson's voice cracked as the recording ended. "I've carried that with me for years," he said. "And I'm here now because it's time. It's past time." He went on to describe a second party, this one in Miami in early 2020, where he witnessed two young women being escorted into a back room after being given unidentified pills. Johnson confronted one of Diddy's staff about it, he claimed, and was told, "This is how the game works. You either play or get out of the way." Johnson left that night and never returned to another Diddy-hosted event. His decision to testify was not taken lightly. Prosecutors confirmed that Johnson had been offered immunity for any peripheral involvement. His legal team had negotiated for limited liability on the grounds that his silence had not directly contributed to any crimes, though it may have extended their concealment. Johnson acknowledged this. "I was a coward," he said flatly. "I didn't protect those girls. I protected myself." By the end of his testimony, the courtroom was frozen in place. The man who had built his image on strength, discipline, and integrity had revealed a side the public rarely sees in celebrities: vulnerability. And perhaps more importantly, accountability. Outside the courtroom, news of Johnson's testimony spread like wildfire. It dominated the headlines. Social media platforms exploded with reactions. Some praised his courage. Others questioned the timing, wondering why he didn't speak out sooner. But legal analysts were unanimous on one point: his testimony shifted the momentum of the trial. More importantly, it pierced the armor of Diddy's celebrity. Up until that point, the defense had framed the allegations as fabricated or exaggerated tales from disgruntled associates. But now, the narrative had a new weight. If a celebrity of Johnson's magnitude was willing to testify, against all industry pressure, risking public backlash and professional fallout, it suggested something deeper was at play. The cultural impact was immediate. Hollywood agents began distancing themselves from past Diddy collaborations. Film executives started reviewing past investments, and victims who had been too afraid to testify began reconsidering. Johnson's decision cracked the surface, and suddenly, the cracks were becoming visible. In the courtroom, the ripple effect continued. The next day, 3 more former party guests reached out to prosecutors offering to testify. One of them, a former reality star, provided photographs from inside one of Diddy's hidden lounges. Another provided a list of celebrity guests who had signed NDAs under duress. The prosecution's witness list doubled within a week. Meanwhile, Johnson's publicist released a statement saying, "Dwayne Johnson did not testify as a celebrity. He testified as a man who could no longer carry the burden of silence." He refused to give interviews or make appearances, saying only that his role was to speak truth and step back. For prosecutors, it was a windfall. Johnson had not only confirmed key details, but had also validated the broader context of intimidation and complicity that surrounded Diddy's empire. His presence in court made it harder for the defense to portray the allegations as fringe or motivated by money. It gave the trial moral clarity. For the defense, it was a disaster. Their narrative was collapsing under the weight of credibility. If Johnson's testimony was true, then the defense would have to explain why so many others had remained silent. Why did so many celebrities, influencers, and executives keep showing up to Diddy's parties despite the rumors? Why had no one, not even someone as powerful as Johnson, come forward sooner? The answer, it seemed, was fear. And now, that fear was losing its grip. In the days that followed, new witnesses confirmed Johnson's account. A former party planner described protocols for events, down to which guests were offered what substances and how certain women were told to entertain VIPs. A celebrity stylist testified that she had been paid $20,000 to keep quiet after seeing what she described as something that looked like trafficking. And Diddy? He sat still throughout Johnson's testimony. No visible reaction. No shaking of the head. No protest. Just quiet tension in the eyes of a man who had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the narrative was turning on him. Dwayne Johnson's testimony didn't just rattle a courtroom. It rattled an entire industry. It forced a reckoning. And it raised a chilling question: how many other powerful figures knew what was happening and said nothing? The trial was no longer about one man's guilt. It was about the ecosystem that allowed him to thrive, unchallenged, for so long. The courthouse had barely emptied out from Dwayne Johnson's explosive testimony when its walls once again reverberated with chaos. What had started as a trial centered around historic allegations against Sean Diddy Combs had now morphed into something much bigger, a trial about power, silence, complicity, and the unraveling of an entire celebrity subculture that had operated with impunity for decades. Johnson's words were still echoing when the courtroom reconvened the next morning. There were murmurs in the gallery that more high-profile witnesses were preparing to come forward. What no one anticipated, however, was how fast the fallout would metastasize across legal, entertainment, and political arenas. Within hours of his appearance, a cascade of events began unfolding at a pace that left even seasoned journalists stunned. First came the leaks. A trove of internal communications between Diddy's legal team and various third parties began making its way to investigative journalists. Though unconfirmed in court, multiple reputable outlets including The Guardian and ProPublica began running deep-dive features on how Diddy's empire of influence had extended far beyond music and parties. There were allegations of shell companies used to funnel payments, NDA coercion tactics, and a long-standing pattern of recruiting celebrities as shields to maintain public favor and deflect scrutiny. Next came the calls from Capitol Hill. Several members of Congress, previously silent, began demanding a Department of Justice probe into possible federal crimes linked to trafficking, money laundering, and obstruction. A bipartisan group of senators issued a joint letter pushing for full transparency and legal accountability wherever this investigation leads. Diddy's defense team, caught off guard, rushed to counter with denials and claims of political grandstanding. But inside the courtroom, the defense could feel the ground slipping. Dwayne Johnson's testimony had done more than damage the narrative. They had lost control of the temperature. From that point forward, every moment was heightened. Every word from a witness landed like a bombshell. The prosecution wasted no time building on Johnson's momentum. They next called Chanel Rivers, a music video producer who had worked with Bad Boy Entertainment for years. Her appearance was understated. She wore no makeup, dressed plainly, and walked with deliberate calm. Her testimony, however, was anything but quiet. She confirmed the existence of a green room policy at several of Diddy's private events, which included screening guests, taking their phones, and assigning them escorts. She testified that many of the women invited were told they were there to network or audition for upcoming music projects, but were later pressured into situations where drugs and alcohol were pushed on them. "I used to believe I was helping women get their big break," Rivers told the jury. "But over time, I realized I was setting them up. They trusted me because I was a woman in the industry. That trust was manipulated." She paused to wipe a tear from her cheek before continuing. "I'm ashamed of the role I played, and that's why I'm here." The defense cross-examined her fiercely, trying to frame her testimony as emotional rather than evidentiary. But the damage had already been done. Her words lent weight to Johnson's and began painting a consistent pattern, not of isolated abuse, but of systemic design. Meanwhile, public sentiment outside the courtroom reached a boiling point. Demonstrations began forming near the courthouse steps, calling for broader investigations. Signs reading "Justice for the Silenced" and "Hollywood's Rotten Core" peppered the streets. Protesters chanted the names of other alleged victims and called out celebrities rumored to have attended the same infamous parties now under scrutiny. The entertainment industry, long silent, began taking action. Major brands that once courted Diddy began severing ties. His partnership with a global alcohol distributor was suspended pending further legal clarity. Streaming services quietly pulled Bad Boy documentaries and removed several of Diddy's collaborations from curated playlists. Perhaps most notably, a popular talk show host, who had previously defended Diddy during an earlier scandal, opened her monologue with a stunning reversal. "I believed him because I didn't want to believe the alternative. But now, after hearing Dwayne Johnson and Chanel Rivers, I believe the victims. I believe the truth is far worse than we imagined." It was a turning point. The defense, sensing public relations collapse, made a calculated move. They called their own surprise witness, Andre Kelly, a former security consultant who had worked for Diddy for over a decade. His job, as he described it, was to keep the scene clean. Under oath, Kelly admitted to forcibly removing guests who weren't playing along, disposing of hidden camera footage, and scrubbing rooms before law enforcement arrived during noise complaints. "I never asked what happened behind closed doors," he said. "I just did my job. But looking back, I should have asked. I should have stopped it." He described elaborate systems for monitoring guests, from facial recognition at the gates to coded wristbands determining which areas of the house they could access. Prosecutors seized on this, pointing out the militarized nature of what were advertised as private parties. This wasn't nightlife, the prosecutor stated. This was calculated containment. Outside, Reporters broke another story. A former bad boy accountant had come forward anonymously, claiming they had processed large payments marked under event services that appeared to be payoffs. Though these documents were not yet introduced as evidence, the weight of circumstantial data was beginning to overwhelm the case. Diddy's attorneys shifted to a more desperate tone, painting their client as a victim of political persecution and cultural scapegoating. They claimed that celebrities were being targeted for their success, and that hearsay had become more powerful than truth. But with every statement they made, more former insiders came forward. Another key moment followed when a tech entrepreneur named Vincent Moreno testified about a secret digital platform used to track and manage NDAs signed at Diddy's events. He said the system had timestamps, facial scans, and biometric backups. Moreno's company had originally designed the system for private security use, but when he learned it was being used to coerce silence, he broke his contract and left the country. He returned specifically to testify. There were faces of terrified women in those records, Moreno said. That's why I had to come back. At this point, the judge issued a warning. The courtroom was no longer a place for media theatrics or political spectacle. She insisted proceedings would continue with respect for due process. But even her authority couldn't stem the cultural reckoning now sweeping across every corner of American consciousness. Inside the entertainment world, a new fear was taking hold. If someone like Dwayne Johnson could be subpoenaed and willingly testify, no one was safe. Talk show panels buzzed with speculation about who might be next. Would Leonardo DiCaprio take the stand? Was there a sealed list of celebrity witnesses yet to be revealed? Were others under investigation? Diddy, once known for his charismatic confidence, now looked visibly diminished in court. His defense team maintained composure, but tension was unmistakable. His entourage, once an impressive display of status, had withered to a few loyal aides. The man who had once symbolized the height of celebrity culture was now facing the edge of ruin. And still, the witnesses kept coming. Courtroom observers noted that the jury's demeanor had changed. They were no longer just listening. They were studying every gesture, every word, every piece of evidence as if history were being written in real time. Jurors were seen taking extensive notes during Moreno's technical breakdown, and several exchanged glances during Rivers' tearful recollections. The prosecution concluded the week by promising that the most damning testimony was yet to come. This trial is about more than Sean Combs, the lead prosecutor said. It is about the victims who were ignored, the people who profited off their silence, and the institutions that failed them. As the court adjourned that day, silence hung in the air like fog. Reporters didn't rush to file copy. Observers didn't rush to leave. Everyone knew that the next phase of the trial would be even more explosive and potentially historic. Diddy, still wearing designer sunglasses despite the closed courtroom, was escorted out without comment. But the spectacle was far from over. The morning of Jim Carrey's testimony began with an eerie calm. No protesters yet crowded the court steps. No helicopters buzzed overhead. The city had temporarily quieted, as if the collective consciousness of millions was holding its breath. Whispers had circulated all night that Carrey had been added to the witness list, but until the court bailiff announced his name in that hushed courtroom, no one believed it. Then came the sound, brief, deliberate, of the courtroom doors opening. In walked Jim Carrey, dressed in a navy suit, no tie, his salt and pepper beard trimmed neatly. He did not smile. He did not wave. He did not offer the familiar charisma the public had known for decades. He was a man transformed, and the entire courtroom could feel it. His presence wasn't about fame. It was about reckoning. The bailiff asked him to raise his hand and swear to tell the truth. "I do," he said, his voice even but subdued. Carrey sat down, adjusted the microphone in front of him, and looked out across the sea of eyes watching him. He began without prompting. "I don't want to be here," he said, "but I need to be." A shiver rippled through the crowd. Carrey explained his connection to Diddy. It was, as he described, a product of a town where everyone eventually knows everyone else. Parties, fundraisers, charity galas, fashion week events. Though not close, Carrey said they had encountered one another many times over 2 decades. The first time was in the early 2000s. The last time, he noted, was a night he would never forget. He described an invitation he received years ago to a private event at one of Diddy's estates in Miami. It was sold as an exclusive artist retreat, Carrey said, a celebration of creativity. Musicians, painters, filmmakers. A safe space for the culturally elite. He paused. But it wasn't that. He continued, detailing the strange arrival process, how his phone was taken, how he was escorted by security to a specific wing of the mansion, and how, once inside, the atmosphere was unlike anything he had seen in Hollywood or beyond. Guests were told to wear color-coded bracelets, which corresponded to different levels of access. I asked what my color meant. They said it meant I was an observer, Carey recounted. That's when I got nervous. He said the party shifted as the night went on. At first, there were performances, spoken word, acoustic sets, experimental dance. But as the clock passed midnight, the music changed, and so did the energy. Guests were guided through hallways into rooms with dim red lighting, strange ambient noise, and surveillance equipment hidden behind decor. Carey paused again, taking a breath. He gripped the edges of the witness box. What I saw in that room was not entertainment. It wasn't art. It was exploitation. He described seeing two young women, visibly intoxicated, dressed in lingerie, surrounded by older men. One man, he said, appeared to be giving directions to a camera operator in the corner. Carey said he approached one of the assistants to ask what was going on and was immediately intercepted by security. They told me to leave that area and return to the safe zone. I was threatened without being threatened, he said. Their eyes said everything. Carey's voice cracked for the first time. He admitted he left shortly afterward, deeply disturbed, but unsure of what to do. I was complicit by leaving. I didn't report anything. I didn't talk about it. I went home, took a sleeping pill, and tried to forget it happened. The prosecutor then walked him through what changed, why he came forward now. Carey said it was the Cassie Ventura lawsuit. When her story came out, I recognized the architecture she described. The security, the staging, the behavior. I could no longer deny what I had witnessed. He added that he struggled with the decision for months, afraid it would be seen as a career-ending betrayal. I was afraid people would ask, why now? Why didn't you stop it then? And the truth is, I was a coward. The courtroom fell silent. Reporters were barely writing, only watching. Carey was then asked a simple question by the prosecution. Did you see Sean Combs in the room that night? He nodded. Yes, he said. He was watching from a mezzanine level, behind tinted glass. For a moment, our eyes met. He lifted a glass to me, smiled, then disappeared. That single moment electrified the room. Under cross-examination, Diddy's attorneys tried to shake his credibility. They pointed to Carey's past mental health struggles. They questioned the reliability of memories from years ago. They suggested he had a vendetta against the entertainment establishment. But Carey didn't flinch. He acknowledged his past publicly, his depression, the tragedy of his former partner's death, his sabbaticals from Hollywood. I've been through the depths, he said. And maybe it's that journey that makes me unafraid now. I'm not protecting a career. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm telling the truth. Diddy's defense tried a different angle, asking Carey if he had personally seen a crime committed that night. Carey paused before answering. No, he admitted. Not in the legal sense. But in the human sense, yes. I saw coercion. I saw silence. I saw theater masking trauma. And I walked away knowing it was wrong. When his testimony ended, Carey didn't linger. He walked out of the courtroom as quietly as he entered. But the impact of his words lingered long after. Outside, the media frenzy reignited with renewed force. Headlines lit up screens around the world. Jim Carrey breaks silence. Carey's testimony rocks Diddy trial. Actor describes exploitation in chilling detail. Legal analysts called his statement a seismic shift in public perception and a moral checkmate. Social media exploded with support, even from former critics. Fans applauded his bravery. Fellow actors praised his courage. Organizations dedicated to victim advocacy used clips from his testimony in awareness campaigns. The entire ecosystem of public opinion had shifted again. Within hours, Diddy's defense team filed a motion to suppress parts of Carey's testimony, claiming it was too anecdotal and prejudicial. The judge denied the motion, stating that Carey's first-hand account was relevant to understanding the environment in which other crimes may have occurred. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Diddy's inner circle was crumbling. Multiple staffers began resigning. 2 music producers cut ties and released joint statements condemning coercive practices in the industry. Rumors swirled that more former associates were now cooperating with prosecutors. The prosecution, invigorated by Carey's testimony, hinted that more surprise witnesses were in the pipeline. We haven't reached the end of the iceberg, the lead prosecutor said during a press gaggle. We've barely scratched the surface. And for Diddy, the implications were devastating. While Carey's testimony didn't establish criminal culpability directly, it painted an irrefutable portrait of moral decay, manipulation, and spectacle. A man once untouchable, lionized in every corner of celebrity culture, was now standing alone, his allies vanishing, his reputation bleeding in real time. As the day's proceedings concluded, the judge called for a recess, allowing both teams to regroup before the next phase of the trial. The gallery emptied in stunned silence. Outside, protesters returned, joined by new crowds holding signs quoting Carey's words. "I saw theater masking trauma. I was a coward. Now, I'm unafraid." The tide had turned once again, not just against Diddy, but against the entire machinery that allowed such abuse to flourish unchecked. The tension was no longer confined to the courtroom. It spread like a contagion across media outlets, PR firms, boardrooms, and recording studios from Los Angeles to New York. Following Jim Carey's gut-wrenching testimony, something vital had shifted. The silence that once protected the powerful was beginning to rupture. Diddy, once insulated by layers of handlers, executives, and brand deals, now stood exposed. And behind closed doors, panic had set in. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution team pored over their next strategic steps, emboldened by the public reaction. But it was Diddy's defense that appeared visibly shaken. The team huddled in private chambers after court adjourned, whispering furiously, trading documents, and making frantic phone calls. Observers noted a new, sharp edge to their demeanor. The smirks that had defined their earlier courtroom appearances were gone. On the second morning following Carey's testimony, the presiding judge convened a status hearing that sent ripples through the gallery. Without prompting, the defense requested an emergency recess for the following day, citing logistical disruptions related to witness management. Legal experts immediately interpreted this as a sign that scheduled witnesses were pulling out or proving unreliable. Outside the courtroom, reports began surfacing from entertainment lawyers and agents that Diddy's legal team was issuing non-disclosure threats to individuals potentially linked to past events. Several recipients, however, refused to be silenced. One such individual was a former bodyguard, known only as Reggie, who had served Diddy for 6 years during the early 2010s. Reggie appeared on a nationally televised morning show just hours after the court adjourned and declared he was prepared to testify voluntarily. "I've kept quiet for a long time," he said in the interview. "I saw things no man should ever see and protected secrets that haunt me every night. But after hearing Jim Carey, after feeling that truth in my bones, I knew I couldn't carry it any longer." His brief interview was enough to send Diddy's public relations team into chaos. Calls were made. Damage control meetings were scheduled. But the story had already taken a life of its own. By midday, at least 4 former employees, 2 drivers, a sound engineer, and a former housekeeper contacted federal investigators to request immunity deals in exchange for testimony. These were not celebrity accusers. These were the people behind the scenes. The invisible ones who were told to be silent, to be invisible, and to follow orders without question. Inside the courtroom, a senior prosecutor stood up during a procedural hearing and read out a prepared statement. "In light of new witnesses who have come forward within the last 24 hours, we request an additional 5 days for witness integration. We believe these individuals will provide direct support to the testimonies already submitted and bring to light further systemic abuse of power." The judge granted the request. The defense protested. The gallery gasped. Reporters scrambled to update their headlines in real time. For Diddy, the delay was catastrophic. It gave the public more time to digest the allegations. It gave victims more time to find their voice. And most dangerously, it gave prosecutors more time to build a case that was quickly expanding beyond the boundaries of the initial complaints. In Hollywood, the backlash spread like wildfire. Brands began distancing themselves. A major athletic apparel company announced a temporary suspension of partnership with Combs Entertainment. A music streaming platform removed several curated playlists featuring Diddy's tracks. Even a high-profile philanthropic board issued a statement that, effective immediately, Mr. Combs will no longer serve in an advisory or ambassadorial role. But perhaps the most dramatic moment came from within the music industry itself. One of Diddy's longtime collaborators, a Grammy-winning R&B singer known for her loyalty to Bad Boy Records, held a press conference to publicly renounce her connection to him. Her voice trembled as she read her statement. "I was 17 when I was signed. I thought he was a mentor, a protector. Over time, I saw things I didn't understand. I blamed myself for a long time, but I now know I was manipulated, along with many others. I am here to say, no more. The press conference was live-streamed and quickly went viral. Within hours, more artists added their voices. Some posted cryptic messages. Others openly denounced the culture of fear and excess that surrounded the entertainment mogul. Meanwhile, back inside the courtroom, Diddy's demeanor shifted dramatically. For the first time, he stopped making eye contact with anyone. No nods. No smirks. No bravado. He sat quietly behind his attorneys, shoulders hunched, jaw clenched. Observers noted that even his legal team had begun treating him differently, less like a client and more like a problem. Behind the scenes, the defense scrambled to reassess their witness list. Several names were reportedly removed without explanation. Subpoenas were ignored. One individual, a producer scheduled to appear for a character defense, sent a note through his legal representative. I will not perjure myself to save a legacy built on destruction. The defense's most pressing concern became the growing pile of corroborating testimonies from unrelated witnesses. Each person, celebrity or civilian, described similar elements: tight security, removed phones, strange rooms, parties that transformed into uncomfortable performances, and most damning, Diddy's presence in the background, often smiling, always watching. The case had evolved. It was no longer about isolated incidents. It was now a pattern, a methodology, a hidden empire operating under the guise of glamour and creativity. Federal authorities began to take a more aggressive stance. Agents requested new warrants. Investigators reopened archived footage from known events. Surveillance footage was pulled from security firms previously contracted for Diddy's private events. One source confirmed that several tapes were now under forensic analysis to determine whether any evidence of coercion or non-consensual activity could be identified. In response, Diddy's lawyers attempted to file injunctions to prevent media outlets from broadcasting witness statements. Those motions were denied. Transparency, the judge insisted, was the court's responsibility in such a high-profile trial. By week's end, the courtroom was transformed. What began as a legal proceeding had become something more, a cultural tribunal. Every day brought new faces, new revelations, new fissures in the dam. Victims who had once fled the spotlight now sat in the gallery, watching silently, sometimes weeping. Celebrities once quick to defend Diddy now fell silent. And still, Diddy did not speak. When the court adjourned that Friday evening, a quiet buzz filled the hallway. A rumor had leaked. A new witness was coming forward. Bigger than Carrie. Closer to the inner circle. Someone who had not just seen the parties, but helped organize them. As the elevator doors closed on Diddy and his legal team, a journalist nearby whispered into her recorder, "The walls are closing in." The courtroom was packed to capacity. Security had doubled overnight, and reporters were pressed shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. A strange sense of anticipation lingered in the air, thick enough to cut through. Whispers bounced off the marble walls like ricocheting bullets. Something big was coming. That morning, as the court clerk prepared the daily docket, a new name was scribbled in the witness ledger. At first, it didn't register. Court staff assumed it was a typo or perhaps a placeholder to throw off the press. But within minutes, murmurs began spreading through the hallways. Legal aides confirmed it. An anonymous source in the district attorney's office confirmed it. Then, at precisely 9:47 a.m., the doors opened, and he walked in. Leonardo DiCaprio, dressed in a modest gray suit, no sunglasses, no entourage, just the quiet, steady presence of a man who had come not for spectacle but for truth. The gallery fell into a stunned silence as the Oscar-winning actor made his way to the witness box. Even the judge appeared momentarily disarmed, glancing at the paperwork again as if to confirm he was seeing what he thought he was seeing. Diddy didn't lift his eyes. He kept them trained on the table before him, hands folded tightly. Only his clenched jaw betrayed any reaction. Sworn in under full oath, DiCaprio took the stand and began to speak. His voice was calm, deliberate. No theatrics. No embellishments. Just testimony, unfiltered and devastating. "I met Sean Combs in the late 90s, he began. We were both at the top of our industries. We saw each other at events, at premieres. Over time, he began inviting me to more private gatherings, after parties, off-site events, sometimes overseas." He paused, glancing toward the jury. At first, it felt like status, power. The circles were exclusive, and the people there were icons in their own right. But the deeper I went, the more I noticed things that unsettled me. He described the process. arriving at gated mansions or secluded resorts, being asked to surrender his phone, signing confidentiality agreements before even entering the venue, and seeing young women, some barely legal, others questionably so, mingling in hyper-controlled settings. I remember one particular night, he said, his voice thickening. It was in Miami, a yacht party. Everyone was laughing, drinking. Sean was in rare form, hosting, dancing, controlling the energy. Then things shifted. Guests started disappearing below deck. A few came back looking shaken. Others never came back at all. He looked directly at the jury. One girl, she couldn't have been older than 19, clung to me and asked if I had a spare phone. Hers had been taken. She said she wanted to leave but didn't know where she was. I never saw her again. There was a collective inhale from the courtroom. The prosecution allowed the silence to sit. DiCaprio continued. He recounted similar events over the years. Lavish parties in Las Vegas, secretive gatherings in the Hollywood Hills, and one particularly disturbing evening in the south of France where invitations were extended but not all accepted. There was a room, he said finally. Always a room. They called it different names, Silent Suite, Candy Corner, sometimes just the lounge. But the purpose was always the same. It was off-limits unless Sean personally approved entry. And everyone knew that once someone went in, they didn't come out the same. Jurors exchanged glances. The term Silent Suite had been mentioned before, first by a housekeeper, then later by Jim Carrey. Now, it was being corroborated again, this time by someone with no prior lawsuits or public vendettas. Leonardo DiCaprio, a man who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by appearing. The prosecution, sensing the moment's gravity, asked him directly, "Mr. DiCaprio, are you saying you witnessed coercive or non-consensual activity at these events?" DiCaprio took a long pause. "I'm saying I witnessed the conditions where those things became possible systemically. There was grooming. There was manipulation. People were paid to stay quiet. And if you spoke up, you didn't get invited back. Or worse." Diddy still didn't look up. His defense attorneys were visibly agitated, shuffling papers, whispering in sharp tones to one another. One of them stood and objected, citing speculative testimony. The judge overruled. DiCaprio was not speculating. He was describing what he had seen. The most jarring moment came when the prosecutor handed DiCaprio a series of photos taken from party archives seized by federal investigators. Some were grainy. Others were sharp and brightly lit. Each image told a story. In one, DiCaprio could be seen standing near a large gold curtain at what appeared to be an estate in Bel Air. In the background, a hallway led to what was later identified as the silence room. "Do you recall this evening?" The prosecutor asked. "I do," he replied. "It was the last party I attended hosted by Sean Combs." "Why did you stop attending?" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "Because someone close to me, a friend, disappeared after that night. Their family filed a missing persons report. It never led anywhere. But I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see what I saw." By this point, many in the courtroom were in tears. Some jury members dabbed their eyes. Even the judge looked visibly affected, adjusting his glasses and taking a short recess immediately after DiCaprio's statement concluded. Outside, news trucks had already begun spinning the testimony into breaking news. Social media lit up. Hashtags related to the trial trended worldwide. Clips of DiCaprio entering the courtroom were looped across cable news networks. In less than an hour, his words became global headlines. But inside the walls of the courthouse, the impact was even more profound. Legal analysts called it the moment the trial shifted irreversibly. One of the most respected actors in the world had just placed himself at the center of a storm, willingly, and exposed an underground culture of exploitation operating beneath the thin veneer of celebrity. DiCaprio didn't wait for fanfare. He left the courtroom through a side exit, accompanied by 2 federal officers. No press conference, no interviews, just silence. Back inside, Diddy's team requested a delay in proceedings to reassess the defense strategy. The judge granted a single day of recess but warned that further delays would not be tolerated. In private, the prosecution met with their growing list of witnesses. Several others had now requested to testify, emboldened by DiCaprio's courage. Among them, a retired music executive, a former fashion photographer, and a woman identified only as Jane Doe No. 3, who had previously refused to testify but changed her mind after watching DiCaprio's statement live on television. For the first time in the trial, prosecutors felt not just momentum, but inevitability. That night, talk shows debated the magnitude of DiCaprio's involvement. Some questioned his silence over the years. Others praised his courage. But most recognized the rarity of his testimony, a figure of massive cultural power breaking ranks with the very machinery that built him. And as the world digested his words, the courtroom readied itself for a tidal wave of fallout. The air in the courtroom shifted before anyone heard the audio. It was as if everyone sensed what was coming but couldn't articulate it. A kind of collective instinct. The gallery buzzed with unspoken tension, and even the most seasoned reporters leaned forward, sensing the moment would be unlike anything they had yet witnessed in this already explosive trial. It was the morning after Leonardo DiCaprio's testimony, and already the prosecution had filed a motion to introduce new audio evidence. According to the court clerk, the material had only recently been authenticated by federal investigators who'd been working in parallel with the FBI's Digital Forensics Unit. The evidence wasn't a video. It wasn't a photograph. It wasn't even a document. It was a voice recording, nearly 11 minutes long, recovered from an encrypted device seized during a raid on one of Diddy's storage units in Los Angeles. As the prosecution approached the bench to formally introduce the file into evidence, Diddy's defense team appeared visibly shaken. One attorney whispered frantically to another. Diddy himself, usually aloof and stoic, suddenly sat upright. He adjusted his posture and leaned slightly forward, his fingers tapping erratically against the surface of the defense table. The judge reviewed the prosecutor's motion and raised an eyebrow. "Are you asserting this recording directly implicates the defendant in criminal activity?" "Your Honor," the lead prosecutor replied. "The recording contains a conversation between the defendant and two high-profile individuals. What's discussed may not only clarify intent, but also illuminate previously unconfirmed allegations of coercion, intimidation, and criminal conspiracy." The courtroom was silent. The judge looked at the defense table. "Do you object to the recording's inclusion?" Diddy's attorney stood. "We do, Your Honor. This was not disclosed during pretrial discovery, and we've had no opportunity to review its contents or question its origin." The prosecutor didn't flinch. "It was authenticated yesterday. We are submitting it under the doctrine of newly discovered evidence." The judge nodded, thoughtful for a moment, then said, "Proceed. Let the jury hear it." The clerk dimmed the lights and set up a basic speaker system. The audio file, labeled only with a date, September 14th, 22, began to play. The first few seconds were indistinct, ambient noise from what sounded like a high-rise penthouse suite. Ice clinking in glasses, faint music pulsing in the background, laughter. Then came the unmistakable voice of Sean Diddy Combs. "You think she's going to talk?" he said, his tone clipped, cautious. Another voice responded. It was lower, raspier, recognizable, but still met with disbelief from many in the room. It was Meek Mill. "She already did," Meek replied. Lawyered up. "Said she kept receipts, man. Videos. Texts. Everything." A pause. Then Diddy again. "She don't know who she's messing with. I built this whole thing. Every door she ever walked through was one I opened." And then, shockingly, a third voice entered the conversation. Calm, confident, but disconcertingly familiar. It was Tom Cruise. "Then you close the door," he said. "You don't ask questions. You don't wait. You handle it." A ripple of disbelief passed through the courtroom like a physical wave. People turned to one another, stunned. Was it real? Had Tom Cruise, an A-list Hollywood icon with no prior connection to this case, just been heard suggesting damage control in a conversation about an alleged whistleblower? The recording continued. Diddy's voice lowered, almost inaudible. "She said she was going to leak everything. All of it. The parties. The flights. The rooms. Even the candy files. Said she was tired of being quiet." Meek cursed under his breath. "And you just let her walk?" "I didn't think she had it in her," Diddy replied. "She used to be loyal. Until she found Jesus or whatever." Tom Cruise again. "That's the thing about people who find redemption. They think it gives them moral high ground. That's when they become dangerous." The audio crackled. More ambient sound. Then Meek again. "So what's the move?" Diddy. "We take care of it. Quietly. Like we always do. Cruise, make sure there's no trail. If it can't be erased, bury it in 1,000 other stories." The room was paralyzed. What they were hearing wasn't just a casual conversation. It was a glimpse into a world of cold, calculated power dynamics, where fame, money, and silence were currency. Every word was soaked in implication. Every pause carried the weight of intent. By the time the audio ended, several jurors looked visibly rattled. One was seen biting their lower lip. Another turned completely away from the defense table. In the gallery, a woman burst into tears. A man near the back swore under his breath. The prosecution approached the witness stand again. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the lead attorney said, "what you just heard was not a movie script. It wasn't fiction. It was a real conversation between three powerful men. What they discussed was not merely celebrity gossip. It was control, suppression, possibly obstruction of justice." The judge recessed court early that day. The defense team was granted a few hours to examine the audio's metadata and prepare a response. But the damage had already been done. Outside the courthouse, the public reaction was immediate. Cable news anchors struggled to keep up. The phrase, "the Cruise tape," began trending globally. Meek Mill's representatives declined to comment, while Tom Cruise's legal team released a brief statement denying the voice was his. Though audio experts retained by the Department of Justice confirmed with 97% certainty that the voice print matched Cruise's biometric data stored from prior